Hello, welcome to Protip. Thanks for joining us today. We're talking with Dave Engel and going to read off some of his accomplishments here. He's the youngest apprentice instructor of the Muay Thai Association of America under Ajarn Chai in 2009. He's got 5 years of teaching experience at multiple East Coast academies and 5 years teaching at some top California Muay Thai academies. He's a registered cornerman for amateur and pro competitions under the IKF, the International Kickboxing Federation, and a top-ranked amateur competitor in the 127 to 130 pound weight class in California from 2013 to 2015, and founder of California Martial Athletics and trainer. Thanks for joining us today.
Problem.
Let's just get started right into it. What got you into Muay Thai?
I started Muay Thai actually kind of by accident. When I was 14, I had joined a martial arts school to learn Jeet Kune Do and Jun Fan, which is Bruce Lee and Guru Dan Inosanto's system. Kind of a original mixed martial arts, kickboxing, grappling, Filipino martial arts like Kali Eskrima. And I was taking lessons for about a year. The owner of the school put on a seminar with this teacher named Ajarn Chai Sirisute. And being a new student, I just wanted to kind of involve myself as much as possible. So I took one of the Muay Thai seminars with Ajarn Chai and quickly realized that this is the direction I wanted to go. So I started training Muay Thai a bit more seriously after that seminar, but kind of just a coincidence.
Ajarn Chai is like a big deal. One of the earlier guys who brought Muay Thai over to the U.S.
Yeah, pioneer. I mean, he spread Muay Thai in his own right out in Carson, California, in Compton, California, strange enough. He was the head conditioning coach for the Dallas Cowboys for some time with Tom Landry, I think that's right. I don't know anything about football, but I know that name. And he also was responsible for helping some of the Thais when they came over and started the Fairtex camp. He was responsible for teaching them how to teach white people, basically. Like they don't know how to teach classes and teach foreigners. A lot of them just trained fighters. Chai Sirisute kind of led the way in class format as we know it now, and basically building up students like you would teach ABCs rather than just for competition. So he's a big deal in my life, and we owe a lot of thanks to him. If you practice martial arts, if it wasn't for him, it probably wouldn't be where it is today. Right.
Yeah, that's a pretty awesome class to stumble into.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, obviously that's a coaching influence for you. I was wondering who are some of your other coaching influences?
Yeah, first and foremost is Chai Sirisute. I mean, he changed my life and got me interested, which kind of led to a career in Muay Thai. Since starting with him, I mean, I've had a variety of instructors that have made an impact in my life and my martial arts career and journey. Notably, Bunkerd Fapimai, Nungsiam Fairtex. These guys are who Joe, my business partner and my best friend, my head trainer, we kind of seeked them out. In Pennsylvania, there weren't too many high-level trainers at the time. This was almost 15 years ago. And after talking to Chai Sirisute and kind of expressing that we wanted to make a career at fighting and teaching, he recommended that we would move to San Francisco. And he gave very little information about how to find these people, but he mentioned Bunkerd and Nungsiam's name. And that was pretty much it. Joe and I decided we were going to make the move, saved up a couple $100 and crashed on some couches.
Which is hard. San Francisco's not a cheap city.
And that's it. So we moved to San Francisco. We found these two guys, Bunkerd and Nungsiam, and kind of just moved to study under them, a lot like a student would move to attend university in a different state or something like that. I would say those are my two biggest ones. And then a variety. I mean, my business partner, Joe, he was my trainer for some time, and he got me to understand more of the philosophy of martial arts, away from the competition side and more just as a student. Currently, I'm training with On Fairtex out in South Bay, down in Newark. And that's been fantastic. He's definitely reinvigorated a lot of the passion I have for training, not just teaching.
Right. Yeah. And how is that? So, I mean, I met you at Fight and Fitness, now Rise Combat Sports.
Yep.
I train with Bunker and Nixium as well. Did the way they teach and coach influence sort of your training philosophy at all? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Bunker more so.
Yeah.
But the way he teaches classes and his method behind teaching, rather than just showing arbitrary combinations and here's a technique of the day and you don't really understand why you used it. He got me to understand a lot what's behind the technique. Yeah, and I learned how to corner fighters from him. I had never really cornered on a consistent basis until I started working with Bunker. And he really took me under his wing and just showed me how to communicate and what to communicate and what not to communicate. And it was a lot of learning on the job, but man, I owe so much to him.
Yeah, he's an incredible trainer.
Incredible.
And that's an interesting gym because I think you will have this experience we can talk to in a minute too, is it caters to people who want to fight competitively and adults and young people who just want to come in and get a great exercise.
Yeah.
I think they do a pretty nice job of structuring their program to sort of account for both,
Absolutely.
which isn't always the easiest thing.
Yeah, and Bunker really kind of spearheaded that, you know. I mean, you were there, I think, before me, or maybe we were around the same time.
I got there in 2007.
Okay, so you were a couple years before me. I knew that.
They had this little tiny gym on Bryant Street.
Yeah, that's right. So you were at the old location. I started there right when they moved into the bigger spot.
It was nice.
And that saw a lot of changes, but I really got to give Bunker the credit and respect to what he's built. And I mean, the amount of people that he has trained that started their own schools and academies, like, man, he's a head influence for sure.
Yeah. I was out on the East Coast, dropped into a random gym just to try it. And I think it was the Guy Chase Academy. He had a photo of Bunker on the wall. It's like 3,000 miles away.
He's your dad's favorite boxer. You know, he's like the old school people's champion. Not many videos on him, and very humble.
He's very,
you know,
mild-mannered, quiet guy.
Yeah, you would never think. You would never know. And a lot are like that, right? It's like very unsuspecting. He's the sweetest guy. And I've traveled with him and really got to pick his brain, and I'm very fortunate for that.
I was going to say he sounds like the Greg Popovich of Muay Thai, because like I don't know if you guys follow basketball, but there's like this coaching tree that's built out from this one coach who's influenced so many other coaches, right? So I mean that's kind of what you were alluding to.
That's exactly right. Cool. Like the Fairtex gym after Alex Gong passed away, and all these other Fairtex instructors started their own schools. I mean, you're right. It kind of branched off of that Fairtex name, you know, and I think Muay Thai in America really owes a lot to Fairtex and the owner, Philip Wong, who sent Bunker and On Ganyao, all these guys over to the States.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, the Bay Area. I see those gyms seem quite connected. I feel like all the owners and trainers know each other.
Yeah, it's good lineage.
Yeah, and people have seminars, and you can go seminars at other gyms and get experience with multiple coaches and multiple gyms, which is really, I've seen other places where gyms are actually sort of internally competitive, and they get this weird, like, they don't share seminars and stuff, and it just seems like such a lot.
It's the secret techniques. It's like Muay Thai, you know, there's nothing fancy to it. It's just how well you do each thing. But I've always believed that you should train with as many instructors as possible. And Bruce Lee has a quote where, you know, I'm kind of butchering it, but it's absorb what's useful, discard what isn't. And I think that's a good mentality to have when learning.
Yeah. I mean, for everything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, you kind of touched on this quite a bit, but what do you think makes a really successful trainer or successful coach in Muay Thai?
There's so many variety of things. Number one, and what has to lead the teaching and the process is passion. 100%. Like if you don't like what you're doing, I mean, it everyone can feel it. You know, it's easy to get the vibe off somebody, and if they're passionate and they love what they're doing and they're committed to it, it makes you want to be better. And I think there's a lot of emphasis put on, especially for trainers in Muay Thai, what they've done in the past in terms of their own accomplishments and maybe as their fighters. But I've trained with a lot of people, and over almost 20 years of training at this point, there's a lot of championship fighters that are absolutely terrible trainers.
Yeah.
So I believe that it's not exactly hand in hand. It's important to have competed and you have that experience that you can reference, and you can also empathize with the situation of what your fighters are going through, and really get an understanding as to the mentality. But I don't necessarily believe it's strict to, you have to have had title belts and the number one contender spots to be a good trainer. I don't think so. A lot of training is also successful training is the care that you put into these students outside of the ring, and I don't just mean training, like personally, like being connected with these people, building a relationship. And you fight harder when you love something than when you hate something. So if there's a love between the trainer and the student and the academy, and you can push really far with that.
Right. Yeah. And I think I've seen that at gyms. They become very much these sort of like almost family organizations.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to build.
Home.
I mean, all my employees are also my friends. The fighters are also my friends. It's like creates kind of a weird boundary issue every once in a while, but I wouldn't change anything. I think it's important to have that relationship.
Right. Yeah. And then so kind of inversely to what makes a great coach or trainer, what do you think makes a really good student, or what does a student need to bring to that?
Good students, again, a variety. The number one thing for me is ability to absorb. This is why I believe it's easier to train kids than it is to train adults. Because when you train kids, you teach them something, you're an adult and you're seen with authority. So what you say kind of goes. They take it for truth. So naive. But the best part, we have a couple kids that I've trained. One, her name's Somo. I've been training her since she was 9 years old. She just won her first world title this year in Canada, multiple state titles. She's ranked top in the country. But training her from a young age, I mean, what you say, they take it as truth. A lot of adults, especially if they've trained previously, something as simple as you telling them like, okay, you're going to use the hook in this combination. And they're hearing you, but in their head, they're already like, well, I like the uppercut better. Like they already have a preconceived idea of what they want to do in training. So I think the ability to trust your trainer and absorb what they're telling you and give it a try first, like don't come into anything with some already set in stone idea of what's going to work for you and what's not, but be open, be willing to learn from multiple people. And especially if you're going to a new trainer and you've had previous training, let the trainer teach the way that they teach. This is a big problem I see with a lot of students that maybe come from other gyms is, well, my coach used to tell me to do this and this coach used to tell me to do that. And it's like, yeah, but you're going to get better information. The coach that you're learning from will be able to communicate and teach you better if you do what they're saying to do. And you can still do all the other things you've had in your past training experience, but just keep it on the back burner. If you're learning from someone, then hear them, don't just listen to them, like hear them out.
Probably makes it easier for folks who've had multiple trainers to kind of see that experience. Cause I kind of can relate a little bit to having, my first trainer be the one that in my mind is the penultimate,
right.
And then you have to learn like, okay, like you said, take what works, and you don't have to take everything because maybe everything doesn't work for you.
Yeah. There's good and bad. There's yin and yang and everything. Right. So it's like, find what works for you, but also be open to changing something. If something works better, be open to that, I think, or if it's more true to you, be open to that.
Yeah. So kind of along that vein, as a coach yourself, a coach and trainer, how is it you kind of stay focused and present, even when you're having an off day and trying to connect with people who maybe not listening to you that well that day, or, any of that kind of challenges that come up?
Yeah. That can certainly be difficult, especially I'm trainer, but I'm also a business owner. So I think it's a difficult position because, owning a small business is hard in any regard, but you're also putting the blue collar side and the physical work, which is physically and mentally exhausting. For me, if I'm having an off day, I try to, it's simple stuff, but like watching videos of my teachers and watching I have a whole catalog of seminars that Chai Sirisute has taught, downloaded on my computer. And a lot of times I'll refer back to those and just think about perspective. Like, I am doing a lot and I'm very busy, but there's people that have been doing a lot more for a lot longer. And it kind of paves the way in that if they can do it, then I can do it too. But everybody's different. Like, some trainers, it might be better for you to just take a day off and reset. I do a lot of extracurricular things to kind of take my mind off of Muay Thai. And, man, I can make a weekend off of like an hour off. Sometimes it's just you take a break and that gives you that recharge. And I think it's important to, appreciate the breaks. There's such a hustle hard, motivate, inspiration culture going on right now, but like, rest is, important too, right? You don't build muscle while you lift weights. The muscle builds while you rest. And I think your brain is the same thing. It's like, I get a lot of good ideas for teaching and curriculum, and not in the gym. Sometimes when I'm just at home, hanging out on the couch, or if I'm on a bike ride, a long bike ride, I'll think of a lot of things to kind of recharge my training and my teaching. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about what inspired you to kind of go out and start your own gym?
Well, the same that inspired me to teach. And if I'm being brutally honest, I think when you're young and you love something, like you have a passion like Muay Thai, you think there's only one avenue, which is, well, if I want to make Muay Thai my life, I have to be a pro fighter and I have to be the best in the world. And in reality, I mean, if you want to make something your life, if you want to make your passion your life, there's so many different routes that you can go. You don't have to be the pro star of the show. You can be a supporter. I mean, you can be a coach. You can make clothing. You can make boxing gloves. You could be a manufacturer. You can run software programs that help people keep track of clients. But if the goal is making Muay Thai or making your passion your life, you need to find a different way in, or multiple ways in. And for me personally, I always wanted to be a competitor and a fighter. I don't think I was ever very good, like at the competition side. I'm not a very good competitor, and I was aware of that. And that's a big reason why I competed, was just to challenge my mental game. So for me, it was a realization that I may not get to the heights of competition that I thought I would when I was younger. But, I can still affect students and help someone with their goals, and I can make a living out of this. I know a lot of professional fighters that still have to work at Costco or something. It can be a really tough life. And I only wanted Muay Thai as my career. I don't want to do it on the side. So I had to find something more lucrative, and find something that would be more time consuming. Because when you compete, you fight maybe 4 times a year, 5 times a year in the United States. And that's just not enough time in the game. If I'm teaching, I teach 6 days a week, 7-8 hours a day. So I'm able to immerse myself.
Very full-time job. So I know when you started your gym, I think it was like right at COVID lockdown. How did you guys survive that?
Yeah, we started in November.
I felt bad for you guys. Yeah.
November of 2019. And I think we locked down in March of 2020, if I believe that. I think that's correct. Right. Cool. We started, luckily we learned from the mistakes of a lot of other gym owners that I've seen. I mean, I've been involved with gyms for many, many years. So I've had good awareness to some things. First one being just going too big, too fast. A lot of people start gyms, they have investors, they buy a really big facility with a very high overhead, and expensive equipment and all these programs. And you do too much too fast sometimes because you're just trying to get to the end goal of having a successful school. Joe and I, we started our school and it was about 700 square feet, tiny. Like if we had 10 people in class, we were like, all right, this is packed. We are full capacity. So luckily we had a pretty cheap overhead. But during COVID, when we weren't allowed to train indoors, a lot of other gyms shut down and they put stuff in storage, or they terminated their leases and just kind of waited for it to boil over. This was a benefit to being incredibly broke at the time because we couldn't do that. I have no income if I'm not teaching. I don't have another job. I don't have a college degree. So we got shared spaces permits through the city of San Francisco. We rented an alleyway across the street from actually where we are now, funny enough. And we were doing classes. Joe and I would take a little push cart, like a wagon kind of thing with the tie pads, jump ropes, boxing gloves. Our students would meet us in the alleyway. We would sweep up all the homeless trash stuff and move people around, or ask someone to move their car if we needed to. The city didn't do a very good job at reserving the space, so it kind of was up to us. We just paid for the space. So we taught classes 3 times a day, 5 days a week out in this alleyway. Nice. And that kind of kept the momentum for us. And we also competed during COVID, but we had to do it in states that were a little more lax about their COVID protocol. So we fought in Wyoming and Boston and out in the Midwest, Reno. Like, we tried to just stay active, because once you stop, you have to start all over again. So the goal was, maybe we're not going to make a lot of money, or we're not going to be gaining students, but the students that we have, if they could just keep going, once we come back inside, that momentum will carry over.
Yeah. But that must have been nice for students as well, because I'm sure there wasn't a lot of opportunities at that time.
Yeah, we were the first ones to do the outdoor classes with Muay Thai. We were the only gym in San Francisco to continue doing regular classes. That gave us a really big advantage. We didn't have time to kind of sit on our butt and wait. I mean, little did we know it would be 2 years of waiting, but
none of us did.
I remember when COVID first happened and we had to shut down. Joe and I had a notebook, and we wrote out a 1-month plan and a 2-month plan if this were to go. And then we're like, just for shits and giggles, we'll do a 3-month. There's no way it's going to go 3 months. We'll do a 3-month plan just to be safe. And 2 years later, it's like, man, it's just unforeseen. It's crazy.
So another quick question for you about running your gym before we'll ask you about competing a bit.
Sure.
What is just generally the hardest part about it, running your own gym?
About being a gym owner? On the business side, I would say lack of resources, lack of guidance. Unfortunately, the city, there's a lot of things I love so much about here, and this has been my home, San Francisco. But we are in a city where money kind of rules. We had countless times we applied for a commercial space. We had all the financial requirements. We had, pretty much everything you could want from a tenant. But because of the city we're in, a lot of small businesses are started with people that already have funds or investors, which we didn't have either of those things in the beginning. So the competition here is just uncomparable. To try to get a commercial space is a hustle in itself. Starting out, that was our biggest hurdle. Now it's similar. There's no handbook to running a small business. And especially when you're hands-on, like I'm in the gym 6 days a week, training fighters, teaching classes, but that's the fun stuff. I like the teaching and I like the training. The morning and the things that people don't see is me in meetings and doing financial statements and working with a CPA and all the bullshit that kind of comes with it, unfortunately. I would say balancing those two is probably the hardest thing, is the physical side and the mental side. I never went to college. I don't have any small business experience, so I'm just learning on the fly. But trial by fire is proven, and I think that's done us pretty well.
Yeah, it seems like you guys are growing, or it seems like you guys are doing well.
Yeah, we've moved out of our old location, and we now have a bigger spot. We're right up the street on Polk Street still, but we doubled the size of the academy. And about a year ago, we hit over 100 students, which is a really big landmark for us. And we've continued growing ever since. There hasn't been a month since COVID that we end the month with less students than we started the month with.
Wow. Nice. Yeah.
I guess started from the alley. Now you're here.
Started from the alley. Now we're here. We're right across the street. Weird enough, the alley that we did those classes in, a year and a half later, we actually ended up moving into the building directly across. So it's almost like, there was a synergy there.
There's something about there's something about the vibe about the alley.
I really appreciate that. It's just strange how it worked out.
Yeah,
I know. It's awesome. Yeah. I guess switching gears to the competition side of things. You mentioned that you're not competing anymore, are you?
That's correct. I do not compete.
Okay. But I guess how do you prepare a student for a fight as a trainer?
Yeah. Every student's different, so preparation kind of varies depending on the martial artist, the student. In terms of the physical side, you've probably heard the word fight camps before. in UFC, they talk about it a lot. And boxing, they talk about, we had a 6-week camp. We had an 8-week camp to prepare for this. And that just refers to the intensity. So when you don't have a competition planned and you're just training just to learn, Joe and I's role is to add new tools to the toolbox. Maybe introduce techniques that you haven't learned before or different strategies that we haven't worked on. But then when fight camp happens, we taper back on the adding new, and we reinforce what you already have in your toolbox and just sharpening it up. So the training load increases. Instead of once a day, you're training twice a day. I like my students to run or do some sort of road work, strength and conditioning in the morning. And then they come in at night. Joe and I hold pads for them. And something unique about our school is we prioritize drilling, which is basically the same as like a basketball team. I mean, doing drills, doing layups over and over to get into muscle memory. Right? It takes 300 to 500 repetitions of something to ingrain in muscle memory. And you can do that with hard sparring, but a safer way is to do drilling. So our fight camps look a lot like simulated sparring, I would call it. And that's something I pride myself on a lot, is reducing the risk of injury to the athlete by doing more controlled situational sparring drills, as opposed to how I came up, which was just spar as hard as you can, go home with a headache, don't talk about it, and show up the next day. I think football's probably gotten a lot smarter with that too, and every sport needs to evolve. So our fighters have very difficult camps, mentally and physically, but I actively try to reduce the risk of injury, especially concussive injury.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You mentioned earlier that as someone who's competed, that allows you to kind of have the empathy towards someone training for a fight. Do you ever find yourself trying to not draw too many parallels with your own fighting experience with somebody that may, be a different style fighter, or how do you kind of avoid, or how do you use it for the benefit of coaching as opposed to it being a detriment?
Yeah. I certainly rely more on I've done this and I've made these mistakes, so I'm going to help you not make these mistakes, instead of looking at
right.
well, I've done this right. I'm good at these techniques. I'm good at these strategies. So you will be too. Right. Maybe like certain things can work, but I think it's easier, or maybe not easier, but more beneficial to the student if you teach off of things that you could have done better. Because in retrospect, there's so many things I would have changed about my competitive career. But I use fighting a lot more for the emotional side, being able to understand what they're feeling, because every fighter puts on a tough face, but every fighter is scared. There's nobody that competes and is not fearful. And being able to recognize the poker face, but the emotions behind it. I felt that, and I've done a good job putting the tough guy face on. So I really try to empathize or sympathize with my students and what they're going through emotionally, and reinforce that, like, okay, the feelings that you have right now are scary, but they're just feelings, and everybody feels those feelings. And, it's okay to have butterflies in your stomach as long as you can get them all flying in one direction. Right.
Yeah. So, it's an interesting experience that, and I've been told as well, when you are competing, you don't want to show the fear because you don't want your opponent to think that this person's scared of me. And if while you're competing and you're fighting, I was always told, don't show you're tired.
Yep.
Don't show you're hurt, because you don't want your opponent to see that and think like, okay, now I have this edge on them.
Right.
But at the same time, your corner person needs to know you well enough to know, like, oh, they're in a bad spot right now. Like, how can I help? It's an interesting dynamic.
I think that's very common, what you just said. I mean, it's such a tough guy sport, tough girl sport, where you're taught to not show any emotion and keep everything kind of bottled up and suppress the scary thoughts. And in reality, I mean, it's something I try to do with my students is get them to talk about it, because if you just hide it down, it will come out at the worst possible moment. Right. If you talk about it and acknowledge it, it makes it more real, but it also makes it more manageable. Something that what's that?
Yeah. It probably normalizes it a bit.
It normalizes it.
Other people are feeling this too.
Yeah.
It's okay. Like, there's a Mike Tyson quote I think about him saying, being afraid going into every single fight.
Yeah. But fear keeps you sharp. You know, fear has made humans survive for centuries and like this is an important feeling, and to pretend that it doesn't exist is ridiculous. So instead of blocking it off and just trying to completely push it out, I like the example of it's kind of like what your parents made you do with your little brother or sister, where it's like, okay, you know, I'm going to a party and your mom's like, oh, but take your little brother with you. It's like, God damn it, this is annoying, but you're going to come with me, but I'm not going to give you the attention. I'm not going to let this ruin my good night. You know what I'm saying? That's how fear is too. It's like, I'm going to feel nervous. I'm going to feel anxious, but I'm not going to let it override. You just got to sit in the back seat, and I'm going to keep the volume on a 2 instead of a 10 or a 0. You know, you can never block it all the way off. So if you just keep it manageable, something I have my fighters do when the fight gets close is visualization exercises and techniques. And I don't just have them visualize winning or knocking their opponent out or getting their hand raised, but I also have them visualize the negative. So I put a lot of attention on, I want my students to visualize them losing a round and sitting in the corner, and Joe and I telling them what they need to improve on and making those improvements. Even visualize, you know, getting hit by a punch that hurts you and puts you on the ropes and maybe you're rocked, but you visualize yourself negating that, right? Clinching them, getting your breathing back to normal, calming yourself down. Because in a fight, if you get in those bad situations and you've never thought about them before, it's terrifying. But if you've thought about it before and you visualize the negative happening, but with a good outcome immediately after, once that negative thing happens in the fight, it's like, I've been here before. I've felt this emotionally and almost physically sometimes in training. You put yourself in handicap positions.
Yeah, almost preparing for that negative thing that it will inevitably happen at some point, and you just want to know how to move forward from that. That's awesome. I was going to ask about tools that you give to your fighters. That seems like a pretty awesome one.
That's a big one,
yeah. How do you know when a fighter is ready to compete?
Yeah, that's such a hard question because everyone's timeline is so different. I think consistency is the most important thing. So training often, and like some people, training often for them is 2 times a week, and that's fine for learning martial arts and fitness. If you want to compete, you got to be there 5 days a week, and that's like minimum, you know. There's certain cues that I look for in a student. Number 1, do they express interest in competing? The second one is, do they express too much interest in competing? Big thing that we get, you know, and I think all gyms go through, is someone comes in, they do 1 class and they're like, all right, and then how long until I can fight? Right. And it's like, you're already looking at the end goal, right? But the end goal comes and goes, like your martial arts journey and enjoying learning, enjoying meeting new people, getting a skill that you've never had before. That is more promising to me because it's more sustainable, right? If you want to fight after your first class and I tell you like, oh man, you're not going to fight for a year and a half, which is very common. I don't like my students to fight much earlier than that. A lot of people quit, you know, but if someone comes in and I ask why they want to start Muay Thai, and it's like, well, I want to learn a new skill for self-defense and for motivation and community, meeting new people, you're going to be able to stick with it a lot longer. So really, like, what are your motivations for competing? I mean, physically, like for aesthetics, seeing their technique get cleaner, seeing them calm down. And, you know, Chris, like when we've sparred in the past, you see those new guys come in and they're spastic and they're trying to throw like haymakers. Once I see that starting to go and prioritizing balance and technique, that makes me more confident that they're getting close to ready to competition. And then extracurricular, you know, like, are you staying late in the gym? Are you doing your road work? Are you watching fights? Are you studying? These are big things. You know, if I see a lot of them align, then I'll bring up the topic of competition. If they seem interested, then I will have them do smokers, we call them, or like exhibition fights. See how they handle pressure, sparring with someone they don't know. I like my students to do at least 4 or 5 of those before we start thinking about amateur.
Cool. I guess thinking about your days when you were competing, can you share your worst performance and what you learned from it and how you move forward?
Yeah. Physically performance. One time I was headlining a show against, he's now a pro fighter and great guy, Sean Clemenco. He's one of my buddies. But we fought in like 2014 or 2015. That was my first time headlining. The show was running way behind, so really late. We weren't going to fight because we were the last one of the night until 10:30 or 11 or something. It was really late. It was really late, maybe a little earlier than that, but it felt like forever because you're there from 12 o'clock for rules meeting. So you're sitting in the back. Once you get your hands wrapped, you can't leave that room. So you're kind of just alone with your thoughts. And that exhausts you. I was physically and mentally exhausted because it just took so much time. It's like a prison in a way. You're just kind of stuck with your bad thoughts. And that's where I was at. So I made the mistake of asking my good friend Nori to buy me a 5-hour energy shot. And I was like, this is what I need to wake me up and make me feel pumped. Like this is going to get me amped up for the fight, but when you're about to fight, your body has a neurological response. It jacks itself up. Yes, it's a competition. It's a sport, but it thinks it's fighting for its life, right? It's a game, but it's a very serious game. So I had a 5-hour energy and I went out there and I just got mollywopped. I just got beat up. And I was way too over anxious and overzealous and extending on techniques I shouldn't have. And that's not to take credit away from Sean. I mean, he's gone on to do amazing things as a pro. And he was definitely the better man that night. But 100% just not trusting my own body and mind to be prepared when the moment comes. And instead taking 300 milligrams of caffeine and not good. That was my worst physical performance. That was pretty bad.
Spiral the anxiety out of control.
Oh yeah. You can watch that one on YouTube. It's pretty horrible. Yeah. But I learned a lot from that. Now I translate that to my fighters when they're feeling tired. It's like, yes, you are right now, but when the time comes, when they start calling your name, your body it's amazing. It can get itself up. It's survival. It's fight or flight.
Yeah.
What's I guess the toughest aspect of now that you've stopped fighting, being a trainer? What are things that you find difficult as a trainer that you didn't as a fighter, I guess?
Yeah, responsibility, accountability. When you're fighting, if you lose, it's because of you, mostly. It's your fault. It's not a team sport, so you can't blame it on the quarterback or you can't blame it on the point guard.
Right.
It's just you in there. And I liked that accountability in fighting. As a trainer, it's way more difficult. And I just cornered my fiance in her retirement fight last weekend. And the nerves that I get for cornering my students versus the nerves that I would get for fighting myself are exponentially worse. Because I don't have control in that moment. I have to trust that they absorbed what I was trying to give them and they can implement that. And there's certain things you can do in the corner, but when the fight starts, the majority of the work is done. You're not making any game-changing decisions for them. So having that lack of control is very difficult for me. But I'm working on kind of relinquishing that control and trusting what I've done in my process and that they're prepared.
Yeah, that's great.
Not at the same level as you, but when I watch my son play basketball, I feel the same way. Where it's like, I want him to do certain things or what I would do, but it's like, well, it's his turn. You kind of just have to sit back and let them do their thing, right?
Probably not just one answer, but what do you think is sort of a pro tip for an aspiring or new martial artist?
Kind of what we touched on earlier, which is be in love with the process, not just the end result, right? Tyson Fury, which is one of my favorite boxers, he had a terrible, terrible bout of depression. And he talked about the reason for that because his goal was to win the heavyweight title from Klitschko, to take it from him. And he accomplished that goal, but there was nothing further. There was nothing sustainable after that goal. So when he got it, it was like, okay, I achieved it. And now what? Right. So you're kind of stuck with this a definitive goal that you can't progress on further.
Right.
So as a new student, I would say leave the goals. That stuff will happen. Right. It's like making money, push the passion first and the money will come too. For students that want to compete or just want to learn, I think a big thing is just being in love with the process and the journey of martial arts. Embrace the new community that you're in. Getting good does not happen in months. That's a year's kind of process.
Sure.
So find little victories, like when you first begin, you have that unconscious incompetence, or you don't even know how much you don't know. The second phase that happens is that conscious incompetence, which is where most people quit. They realize like, oh, I don't know anything and I'm never going to know anything. And all these other people are so much better. But the solution to that is just spend the time. Don't worry about the time. And just enjoy learning. I mean, as adults, how often do we learn something new? Like,
Right.
Or absorb something new, like really hear something new.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like you're saying, martial arts, I mean, in a lot of sports in general, like the end goal really isn't where it's at. It's sort of a lifelong thing. And you never stop.
Yeah. You can only be a fighter for 10 years. You can be a martial artist for forever.
Right. Yeah. I remember when I first started having this sense of like, when was I going to be good? Or ready.
Right.
And then you realize, but like never, like you're never done. You're always getting better. And like you're saying about, as you learn more, you become conscious of all the stuff you don't know.
Yep.
So the sense of like, 6 months in, you might think you're pretty good.
Oh yeah.
6 years in, you're like, there's so much I don't know.
it's so relative, right? Like being good, you're only good depending on who you're standing next to. Right. I know that I am good, but then standing next to like someone like a Bonkurt or Chai Sirisute, where their knowledge is just like exponentially greater than mine, and I'll get there eventually. But good is such a relative word, Like, are you happy in your training and learning? That's more important.
Yeah.
And it's constant refinement, right? Like even in other sports that I play, what I thought I was doing well 6 years ago, it feels like I wasn't doing that very well at all. And I've gotten so much better now, but I'm sure 5 years from now, if I keep at it, there'll be even more improvements, right? As you go along.
Nonstop.
So, yeah. Nonstop. Got to love the process, as you said. I guess jumping into the last segment, which is the rapid fire round. It's quick hitters, I suppose. Favorite fighter.
Thai fighter is going to be Put Lorlek, which is old school Muay Thai, but innovative in his footwork and his technique. And one of the first fighters I ever watched. Put Lorlek is my favorite Thai fighter. My favorite foreigner would be Danny Bill from Cameroon. Same thing, amazing technique, calmness like you've never seen. Looks like he's just walking in the park. It's like incredible. I love those guys.
Awesome. What's your favorite walkout song?
My fiance Tina just fought last week, and I always pick the walkout songs for my students. All right, not always, but when you get more than 5 amateur fights, you can pick your own walkout song. Before those 5 amateur fights, I picked the walkout song. That's my control. Nice. And she did "What's Love Got to Do with It" by Tina Turner. That might be my number one so far.
That's great.
Yeah.
Favorite training gear?
I like cheap stuff. Like so many people with like a month training, they buy winning gloves and the big headgear and spend $1,000. Back in the day, the legends that I grew up watching, like the guys in old Thai camps, and it's kind of cheap stuff. I like Pro Boxing Supplies gloves. They're $60. They last me just fine. Nothing fancy. And I like Fairtex. Obviously, Fairtex is the gold standard, so I'll go with Fairtex.
Yeah, cool. Favorite exercise?
Well,
let me rephrase that. Favorite exercise that you like to do, and then that you want your students to do. I guess they could be different.
Yeah. Favorite exercise for me, in terms of Muay Thai context, is shadow boxing. Underappreciated, underused. It's the number one thing to get your technique better and to relax. That's what I like for me. For my students, if we're looking at more of an advanced student, if we're thinking more competitive, it's just situational sparring, drilling. Even simple stuff like sparring around where one person can only punch, one person can only kick, learning your distance and your strengths that way. Layering techniques, starting with a jab cross, and then you add jab cross, your opponent punches, you slip, and then after the slip, you add a hook, and then after the hook, just layering things. I like that, and it keeps me interested as a coach. I like that a lot.
Yeah, nice. And I guess least favorite exercise that you like to do.
Burpees.
Burpees.
Done. It's a cop-out exercise. Cop-out exercise.
Do you make your students do it?
Sometimes. It's like a punishment. Yeah, it's a punishment maybe. If they're late or something, I'll do that. But I hate burpees, and I think they're just terrible.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Cool.
Hey, well, yeah, thanks for joining us today, man.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.